The rain came down like a blade wrapped in ice, tearing through the Philadelphia night with the kind of violence that made the world seem sharp and dangerous. The Harrington mansion stood against the storm like a fortress, all limestone and arched windows, perched on a hill where the old money lived behind gates that cost more than everything Isabella Morales owned. She ran through the downpour at 9:47 in the evening, her maid's uniform torn at the shoulder, dark hair plastered to her pale face, one hand pressed against a gash that bled steady and warm down her back. The wound throbbed like a second heartbeat, but the fear was worse. The fear made her limbs feel like they belonged to someone else. Her name was Isabella Morales. She was 28 years old but looked a decade older, the kind of aging that came from counting pennies instead of eating them, from working double shifts and sleeping for hours, from learning that the world has no mercy for women like her. Her eyes were dark brown and wide with the kind of terror that comes from knowing your abuser knows exactly where you sleep. She had been caring for Noah since dawn, the 5-year-old who had lost his home in a fire 3 weeks ago, whose small hand still trembled when loud noises came. She had been his anchor all day, reading him picture books, braiding his hair, sitting beside his bed while he slept because nightmares came when she left. And then Tyler Brennan had found her near the servants' entrance with threats that made her blood turn to ice. His fists had come fast. His voice had come faster. The servant entrance of the mansion was dark, lit only by a single brass fixture that cast everything in amber. Isabella stumbled through it, trailing water and desperation onto the white marble floors she polished every morning on her hands and knees. The smell of expensive leather from the study drifted through the hallway. Thunder shook the massive chandeliers overhead, and the sound echoed like the world was breaking apart. That was when she saw him. He stood in the doorway of his private study, framed by darkness, and he was bleeding. Nico Valenti. 35 years old, built like someone who made other people afraid for a living. His white dress shirt was soaked dark with blood from 2 gunshot wounds, one in his side, one in his shoulder. His dark eyes, the kind that looked like they had seen things that made other men pray, locked onto hers across the empty hallway. Behind him stood 2 men in dark suits, their hands moving automatically toward weapons they wore like second skin. Rocco and Pietro. She recognized them from the time she cleaned the study late at night, from the way they moved like men who knew violence was just another language. Isabella should have run. She should have apologized and disappeared into the shadows where she belonged. Instead, something older than fear moved through her. Instinct. The same instinct that had kept her alive through an abusive childhood, through abandonment, through nights she had no money for rent. She moved forward on trembling legs, and she pressed the torn fabric of her apron against the worst of his wounds with steady hands despite her own injury. "You're bleeding out," she whispered. Her voice shattered like glass against the marble. Rocco's hand tightened on his weapon. Pietro stepped forward. But Nico Valenti raised one hand, slow and deliberate, never breaking eye contact with this terrified maid who had just walked into a scene that could get her killed in 100 different ways. "It's fine," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like thunder moving across a summer sky. "Let her." The study was warm. There was a leather couch the color of cognac, a mahogany desk that cost more than a year of her salary, and a private bathroom attached by a heavy wooden door. Isabella guided him to the couch, her small hands barely able to support his weight, her mind fragmenting between the shock of touching him and the shock of the wound. Blood soaked through fabric and skin. She had learned about wounds from living in poverty, from watching neighbors suffer because they could not afford doctors, from her own mother's illness that had taken everything. She moved to the bathroom and found white towels so thick they felt like clouds. She ran water hot enough to burn her skin and began working. Press, release, press again. The bleeding slowed. Her fingers, rough from chemicals and work, moved with surprising gentleness as she cleaned the edges of the wound. He watched her with those dark eyes that saw everything. "What is your name?" he asked. "Isabella Morales." "I work here." "I clean." She stopped. She had said too much already. "I know who you are." It was not a question. Footsteps came from upstairs. Margaret Harrington's voice, shrill and venomous, echoed down the hallway like poison seeping through walls. Margaret was the matriarch of the Harrington estate, 63 years old, with silver hair pulled so tight it made her face look carved from ice. She wore a black silk robe and pearl earrings, and her eyes held the kind of cruelty that only came from a lifetime of getting everything she wanted without consequence. "That thieving maid is being dragged to court tomorrow morning," Margaret called out, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I have already called my lawyers. She has been stealing from this household for weeks. The police will arrest her at dawn." Isabella froze. The towel in her hand went still. She looked at Nico Valenti, and something in his face changed. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. But what Isabella did not know was that Margaret Harrington had made a call to Rocco and Pietro earlier that evening with an arrangement that would change everything about what happened next. Before we continue, drop a like if this story is hitting you hard. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe now so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to 3 weeks ago, when Isabella Morales lost absolutely everything and the world decided she was worth nothing at all. 3 weeks before that terrible night, the fire had come to the apartment complex on Morrison Street where Isabella had lived for 7 years. A fire that started in the wiring, in the walls of a building the landlord had let rot because tenants like her could not afford lawyers. The fire had come at 2 in the morning. Isabella had woken to smoke so thick she could taste it on her tongue, metallic and wrong. She had grabbed Noah. He had been staying with her for a month by then, a child from the family she worked for who had nowhere else to go, and she had run. She had run down 3 flights of stairs with flames chasing her like a living thing. She had run until she could not breathe. But when she turned around, everything she owned had already turned to ash. $17. That was all Isabella Morales had in her wallet after the fire. Not $17,000. $17. Her apartment was gone. Her clothes were gone. Her identification was gone. The small photo of her mother was gone. She had nothing. She was standing in the street watching firefighters battle a building that was already dead, wearing borrowed clothes, and she had $17 to last for however long it took to figure out her life. The family she worked for, the Harringtons, had allowed her to stay in the servant quarters. That was their mercy. Margaret Harrington had allowed it because Isabella was useful. She cleaned faster than anyone else. She worked for less. She never complained. She never asked for raises or benefits or respect. She was, in every way that mattered, invisible. But the bills had come. The hospital bills for her mother's cancer treatment, from years ago, from a debt that never stopped growing. The debts to loan sharks who had given her money when she was desperate and broken. The foreclosure notice for a home she had lost long before the fire, back when things had still felt like they might get better. $150,000. That was the number that sat in her chest like a stone. $150,000 owed to men who gave her exactly 2 weeks to pay or they would take Noah and place him into foster care, a system that would swallow a wounded child whole and never spit him back out the same. 2 weeks. 14 days. She had been counting them like a prisoner marks a calendar. She worked as a maid in the Harrington mansion, making $8 an hour, receiving tips that never came, eating leftovers from the garbage when Margaret Harrington was not watching. She took care of Noah. She studied for her GED at night, even though sleep was a luxury she could not afford. She counted every penny. She made every decision about whether to eat or to save. And then Margaret Harrington had called her into the study and smiled that cold smile, the one that meant bad news. 3 pieces of jewelry have gone missing from my collection, Margaret had said, her voice sweet as poison. A diamond bracelet. A pearl necklace. And a very old sapphire ring my mother left me. Isabella had felt the words like a punch to the stomach. She had never stolen anything in her life. She had been raised by a mother who worked 3 jobs and still died poor, a mother who had taught her that dignity was worth more than survival. I did not take anything, Isabella had said, her voice barely a whisper. I have called the police, Margaret had responded, examining her fingernails as if this was something boring. I have also called my lawyers. You will be arrested tomorrow morning. The jewelry will be found in your possessions. I have already arranged everything. It is unfortunate, but one cannot trust these people. These people. That was what Isabella was. Not a person. A category. A problem to be solved. She had left the study and returned to the servant quarters where Noah was sleeping, his small hand curled around a stuffed bear, his face peaceful in a way his waking hours never allowed. She had sat on the edge of her cot and felt the world collapse. And that was when Tyler Brennan had called. Her ex. The man who had hit her so many times she had stopped counting. The man she had escaped 5 years ago with nothing but her mother's gold locket, that small piece of jewelry that was the only beautiful thing she had ever owned, that had belonged to her mother and her mother's mother before that. I know where you live, Tyler had said, his voice like grinding metal. I am coming for you tomorrow. And when I get there, I am going to teach you what happens to women who think they can leave. She had hung up the phone. Her hands had been shaking so badly she had dropped it twice. So Isabella Morales sat in a small room in a mansion that was not hers, wearing clothes that were borrowed, with a son she could not keep, facing arrest in the morning for a crime she did not commit, and running from a man who wanted to hurt her. She was nobody. She was invisible. She had $17 to her name and a gold locket and a child who deserved better than this. She did not know that in the study above her head, a man named Nico Valenti was about to receive 2 gunshot wounds from his own brother. She did not know that in exactly 8 hours, she would stumble through the servant entrance covered in her own blood and rain. She did not know that everything was about to change, that darkness and light were about to collide in her small, broken life, and that the only man in Philadelphia powerful enough to destroy everything threatening her was the one man she could never afford to love. All she knew was that the clock on the wall read 11:52 at night, and she had less than 8 hours left before everything fell apart. 3 weeks before the night everything changed, Isabella Morales stood in the rain-soaked ashes of her life and held a single photograph. The apartment building on 8th Street had burned at 3 in the morning, an electrical fire that spread through the cheap wood frame like a curse, consuming 4 floors in less than an hour. Firefighters had declared it a total loss by dawn. Now, at 6:47 in the morning, the November cold cut through her thin jacket and she stood barefoot on the wet concrete. Her shoes had burned, watching men in heavy coats pack equipment into trucks, their movement slow and final, like pallbearers leaving a funeral. The smell was everywhere. Not the clean, sharp smell of a campfire, but something toxic and wrong. Burned plastic, charred wood, the acrid ghost of everything she had owned. Smoke still rose from the collapsed west wall in grey ribbons that dissolved into the pale sky. Ash coated her hands and her hair and her clothes like a second skin made of death. She looked down at the photograph she held, protected because she had grabbed it from her nightstand in the 10 seconds she had to escape. Her mother's face stared back at her, 30 years old and smiling, alive in a way Isabella had stopped being years ago. $17 sat in the pocket of her borrowed sweatshirt. That was the sum total of her remaining wealth. $17 and the gold locket hanging beneath her borrowed shirt, a small rectangle of metal no bigger than her thumbnail that had belonged to her mother and her grandmother before that. The locket was the only beautiful thing she had ever held that was truly hers. Everything else was ash. She had worked as a live-in nanny and housekeeper for 6 years across the wealthy neighborhoods of Philadelphia. Chestnut Hill, Rittenhouse Square, the mansions of old money where the dust on the baseboards cost more to remove than she earned in a month. She had raised other people's children while her own childhood was erased. She had scrubbed marble floors on her hands and knees, had served dinners she was not permitted to eat, had listened to complaints about the thread count of Egyptian cotton in households where cashmere coats hung forgotten in closets. And in 6 years, she had built nothing. Saved nothing. Owned nothing except the clothes on her back and a photograph and a locket and the understanding that she was invisible. Then she met Noah. The emergency shelter operated out of a church basement in North Philadelphia, a grey concrete room that smelled like instant coffee and institutional desperation. Social services had set up a table near the door where they processed families displaced by the fire. Children sat in folding chairs wearing donated clothes that did not fit, their eyes hollowed out by loss. Isabella had been standing in line to fill out paperwork when she heard him cry. It was not loud. That was what struck her most. Not a wailing, desperate cry, but a small, internal sound, the noise of a 5-year-old boy who had cried so much that his body had forgotten how to do it loudly anymore. She turned toward the sound and saw him sitting alone on a metal folding chair, his legs not quite reaching the ground, his small frame swallowed by an oversized donated shirt that hung past his knees. He had brown eyes, this boy. Eyes that had watched the fire take his parents from him. Eyes that looked at the world and expected nothing. Isabella walked to him. She did not think about it, did not calculate the consequences. She simply sat down on the folding chair beside his, and he looked at her with those destroyed eyes, and she did not look away. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice soft like a prayer, like a woman soothing a lost child. "Noah," he said. Nothing more. Just Noah. His voice was a whisper, barely a sound at all. They sat together for an hour without speaking, and when the social worker approached to process his intake, Isabella stood and asked the question that would change everything. "He needs a guardian or placement tomorrow?" The social worker, a woman with tired eyes and her hair pulled back so tight it looked like pain, nodded. "Fire killed both parents. No relatives in the system. He'll go to emergency foster care tomorrow if we don't find someone. Could be separated from his siblings if they can't be placed together." She paused. "Do you know the family?" "No," Isabella said. "But I know him now." She took Noah home to the shared room in a boarding house on 11th Street, a converted closet with a window that looked onto an alley. She had worked for a bankruptcy lawyer in Rittenhouse Square at the time, 12-hour days for $8.50 an hour, keeping Noah hidden in those precious hours between pickup at the shelter and evening. But it was not sustainable. Children cost money. Noah needed food and warm clothes and a bed that did not collapse when he lay down. He needed safety and stability and the kind of future that $17 could not build. So Isabella made a choice that would echo for the next 3 weeks and beyond. She went to a loan shark named Vincent Russo who operated out of a storefront on South Broad Street, a place with dark windows and no sign, a place everyone knew and no one spoke about. The office smelled like cologne and cigarette smoke and the distinct metallic taste of desperation. Vincent sat behind a desk made of black marble, his hands covered in gold rings so heavy they looked like weapons, his smile revealing too many teeth, teeth that had never learned kindness. $150,000, Isabella said, standing in front of that desk with her spine straight and her hand steady, though inside she was breaking into pieces. "I need it for emergency guardianship, legal fees, temporary housing. I can pay it back." Vincent leaned back in his chair and laughed. Not a laugh that meant anything was funny, but the laugh of a man amused by the impossible hope of desperate people. "You want to tell me how a maid is paying back $150,000? His voice was like grinding metal, like something broken being dragged across concrete. "I'll work," Isabella said. 2 jobs. 3 jobs. Whatever it takes. He considered her for a moment, actually considered her, the way someone might consider a piece of inventory they were evaluating for value or disposal. Then he slid a contract across the desk. 2 weeks, Miss Morales. 14 days. $150,000, or the boy goes back into the system. Non-negotiable. She signed with a pen that cost more than her monthly rent. She did not ask what happened if she could not pay. She already knew. The next day, she found work at the Harrington mansion on the outskirts of Rittenhouse, a 3-story Georgian estate built in 1887 by a family whose money had calcified into cruelty centuries ago. The head of household was Margaret Harrington, a woman of 63 who wore Chanel suits and carried a small dog that she cared for more than she cared for the household staff. Margaret looked Isabella over on the interview, examining her like a cut of meat at a butcher's counter, her eyes lingering on Isabella's cheap shoes, her worn hands, her accent that betrayed her origin. "You'll do," Margaret said finally, her voice dripping with dismissal. "But don't think you belong here. You're hired as live-in housekeeper and nanny for the household. You'll have the converted room off the kitchen. The boy can stay in the servants' quarters with you, but if I hear him cry even once, he's gone. Is that clear?
Yes, Isabella said.
Thank you.
Don't thank me.
Just work. Isabella's days became mathematics. 5 o'clock, wake up in the dark of the servants' quarters, her and Noah sharing a room no larger than a closet. She would leave him sleeping and move through the mansion like a ghost, like a woman who had learned to be invisible. The marble floors of the grand foyer needed polishing, and she would get down on her hands and knees, the cold stone pressing into her kneecaps, her fingers moving in circles, 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 until the floor reflected light like water. The kitchen needed preparation for breakfast that she would cook for the Harrington family and the household staff, but which she would not eat. There was laundry and vacuuming and the careful dusting of objects worth more than everything she had ever owned. 14-hour days collapsed into each other. She would steal 15 minutes between lunch service and afternoon cleaning to check on Noah in the children's playroom, watching him color with donated crayons, his small hand steady even though his eyes were still hollow. She would touch his head, just once, just enough to feel that he was still here, still alive, and then she would disappear back into the work. 1 week after the fire, Tyler Brennan appeared. He came to the service gate on a Tuesday evening, his broad shoulders filling the iron frame, his smile a weapon disguised as warmth. Tyler had been her boyfriend for 2 years, and the relationship had taught her what love looked like when it was poisoned from the start. She had not seen him since she escaped 5 years ago, had gotten the restraining order that meant nothing, had filed police reports that were filed and then forgotten because his cousin worked in the Philadelphia Police Department and could make such things disappear. "Isabella," he said when she opened the gate, his voice like a knife slipping between ribs. "You look good. You look tired, but good. I've been looking for you for 5 years." She tried to close the gate, but his hand caught it, and his strength was something she had forgotten, the casual power of a man who believed he could have whatever he wanted. "I am not interested in talking to you," she said, and her voice was steady even though her hands were shaking. "You don't have to be interested. I am." He leaned closer, and his hand found her wrist, and he gripped it the way he used to grip it, firm enough to hurt, firm enough to remind her that her body was not her own when he decided it belonged to him. "I know where you live now, Isabella. I know you're here in this mansion with a kid. I know everything. And I'm coming back tomorrow night, and we're going to have a conversation about why you thought you could disappear from me." His words were whispered, intimate like a secret, like a love confession, but they tasted like blood. When he released her wrist, red marks bloomed beneath his fingers. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 5 years ago. "I want nothing to do with you," she said. "That's fine. I want everything to do with you. See you tomorrow night." He left, and she stood at the gate for a long time, watching the street empty of his presence, feeling the cold November air cut through her like a blade wrapped in ice. She looked down at her wrist where his fingers had left impressions, marks that would deepen into bruises that would require explanation she could not give. That night, she checked on Noah as he slept in their shared room, his small body curled beneath a blanket she had washed 12 times to keep soft. His breathing was even and peaceful, the sleep of a child who had learned not to dream anymore. She sat on the edge of the mattress they shared and looked at the clock on the wall. It read 9:42. She had 14 days to find $150,000. A man she had escaped was looking for her with violence in his fists, and the woman who employed her was spreading rumors that she was stealing from the household. She had $17 to her name and a gold locket and a child who deserved better. She had no plan and no options and no path forward. She only had the clock, measuring time, marking off the hours until everything fell apart, tick by tick by tick. The sitting room smelled like old money and furniture polish. Margaret Harrington sat in her high-backed chair like she was posing for a portrait, her silver hair swept back with perfect precision, her diamond necklace catching the late afternoon light and scattering it across the cream-colored walls. Isabella stood near the doorway, still wearing her work uniform, her hands clasped in front of her because she didn't know what else to do with them. The clock on the mantel read 6 o'clock exactly. "My emerald bracelet is missing," Margaret said. The words fell like stones into still water. Worth $80,000. You were the last person in my bedroom this morning. Isabella's mouth opened, then closed again. She had been in Margaret's bedroom. She had dusted the nightstands, vacuumed the Persian rug, arranged fresh flowers in the crystal vase on the dresser. She had not touched any emerald bracelet. Mrs. Harrington, I would never, Isabella started, but Margaret raised one pale hand and Isabella stopped mid-sentence. And I've reviewed the household accounts, Margaret continued, crossing one elegant leg over the other. $3,000 missing over the past month. All during your shifts. The room began to feel smaller. Isabella could feel her heart moving up into her throat, beating fast like a trapped bird. That's not possible. I haven't taken anything from this house. Margaret stood and walked to the window, her back to Isabella now, her posture perfect even in anger. I've already contacted my lawyers. They're drawing up the charges. The court date is set for 4 days from now. Theft and fraud. She turned to look at Isabella directly, and her eyes were the color of winter ice. You should prepare yourself. My legal team is already prepared. Isabella felt the room tilt. For days. Court. Charges. The words didn't arrange themselves into sense in her mind. What Isabella did not understand in that moment was that Margaret had been planning this for 8 weeks, ever since Nico Valenti had walked into this mansion for a business meeting and refused to even look at Margaret's daughter Vanessa. Margaret knew that Isabella cleaned Nico's private study. Margaret knew that in Philadelphia, in the circles where Nico Valenti moved, an accusation against someone close to him was a way to remind him that Margaret Harrington still had power. This wasn't about a missing bracelet. This was about a woman scorned, a daughter rejected, a social position threatened. This was about control. You can leave now, Margaret said, turning back to the window. Pack your things. You're dismissed. That night, Isabella sat in the converted closet on the 3rd floor where she and Noah slept. The space was barely larger than a bathroom, a single mattress on the floor, a plastic milk crate for her 3 changes of clothes, a window that looked out onto the gardens where the Harringtons grew things that cost more money than she would see in 5 lifetimes. Noah was already asleep beside her, his small body curved into a C shape, his breathing soft and even. She counted her money again, though she already knew the total. $17. $17 and a gold locket that had belonged to her mother, the only thing she owned that wasn't an absolute necessity. The locket was tiny, small enough to fit in the palm of her hand, but inside it held 2 photographs so old the faces were starting to fade. The eviction notices were stacked on the floor beside the mattress. 12 days until she and Noah would be homeless. But that wasn't the worst deadline. The worst was the loan sharks. $150,000 due in 10 days, or Noah went into foster care. That was what they had promised her when she couldn't make the payments after the fire burned everything. Your kid stays with you, or he goes into the system. Your choice, sweetheart. She picked up her mother's locket and held it against her chest. Mama, she whispered into the darkness. I don't know what to do anymore. That night, she wrote in the journal she kept hidden behind the milk crate. Her handwriting was small and tight, pressed hard against the paper like she was trying to force her desperation into words. She wrote about the court date and Margaret's cruelty. She wrote about Tyler finding her again, about his hands and his words and the fear that never quite left her body anymore. She wrote about Noah and how unfair it was that a 5-year-old had to be this quiet, this careful, this grateful for scraps. She wrote about the 10 days ticking away like a countdown to the end of everything. Outside the window, the first drops of rain began to fall. Then more. Then sheets of it, the kind of November rain that came sudden and violent, turning the muggy air into something cold and sharp. And in the gardens below, where the expensive flowers grew in their expensive beds, a shadow moved through the gate. Tyler Brennan had been looking for Isabella for 3 weeks. He wasn't a large man, but he carried violence around him like cologne. His hair was dark and his eyes were darker, and there was a scar that ran from his left temple down toward his jaw, a souvenir from a prison fight 8 years ago. He wore a jacket that showed the wear of too many nights outside, and his hands were the hands of someone who had learned to make fists before he learned to make anything else. He had found her at the Harrington mansion because he had followed her from the diner where she worked double shifts. He had watched her board the trolley. He had stood outside the gates and watched the lights go on in the windows of the rich people's house, and something cold and furious had begun to grow in his chest. At 9:30 that night, Isabella came outside to bring in the garden chairs before the rain got worse. She didn't see him until his hand was on her arm, pulling her around the corner of the mansion where the stone wall rose up behind the servants' entrance. "You think you can just disappear?" His voice was the kind of voice that came from somewhere deep and broken inside him. "You think you can just start over like I'm nobody? Tyler, let me go." Her voice was steady, which was the kind of lie her body told even when her heart was screaming. "There's nothing between us anymore." His hand moved from her arm to her throat. Not squeezing yet, just holding her there, letting her feel the weight of his fingers. "You're mine, Isabella. You've always been mine." She brought her knee up and twisted away from him, and for a moment she was free, stumbling backward toward the door. But he caught her again, and this time his other hand came up with a blade, silver and thin like a smile. The cut wasn't deep, it was quick and almost casual, a line across her shoulder blade that bloomed red immediately, but it was enough. She ran. The hallway inside was cool and quiet after the violent rain outside. Her shoulder was bleeding down the back of her shirt, and her breath came in gasps, and she didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from the gardens, away from the gate, away from Tyler's voice still calling her name into the storm. She stumbled toward the light coming from beneath the study door. Nico Valenti was standing at the window when she burst in. He had changed out of the suit he'd worn that morning, the suit that had 2 bullet holes in it, one through the shoulder and one through the ribs. He was wearing black now, a black shirt, black trousers, everything tailored to fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a gold watch on his left wrist that probably cost more than Isabella's annual salary. He was 34 years old, and he had been running his family's empire since he was 22, and he had never, in that entire time, let anyone see him vulnerable. Until now. Blood was seeping through the bandages on his shoulder and his ribs, slow and steady, because he had refused to let anyone call a doctor. That morning, his own brother Marco had set up an ambush at the warehouse. Marco, who had grown up in the same house as Nico, who had learned to fight beside him, who had promised to be loyal unto death. Marco had sold their distribution routes to the Castellano crew, had tipped them off about the movement of product, had taken the payments and disappeared. 2 bullets had found Nico before his men had found Marco trying to run. He was thinking about that when Isabella crashed through the door, bleeding from her shoulder, terrified, wild-eyed. She gasped. "I need to." She saw him standing there, saw the blood soaking through his bandages, and something shifted in her expression. The fear didn't leave, but it moved aside to make room for something else. Something that looked like concern. She walked toward him instead of away. "You're hurt," she said. "So are you," he replied. She found the first aid kit in the desk drawer, the one kept for emergencies, the one that had been used that morning on wounds that should have sent him to a hospital. She gathered supplies, gauze, antiseptic, fresh bandages, and when he didn't protest, she told him to sit down. Saturday. Her hands were shaking as she unbuttoned his shirt, but they steadied when she saw the wounds. She had patched up injuries before. She had cleaned cuts and scrapes on the diner manager's hands when he burned himself. She had held her own mother when the cancer had made her thin and fragile and used her last moments to tell Isabella to be strong. "This one's deep," she said, examining the wound on his ribs. "Hold still." She worked with efficiency born of desperation. The antiseptic made him wince slightly, the only sign of pain he allowed himself to show. Rocco and Pietro watched from near the door, their faces unreadable, but their eyes were betraying the shock of what they were witnessing. In 15 years, neither of them had ever seen anyone touch Nico Valenti like this. Like he was a person who could be hurt. Like he was someone who needed care. "Who did this to your shoulder?" Nico asked while she worked. Isabella hesitated, tape halfway between her hand and his wound. My ex-boyfriend. Tyler Brennan. He found me. Nico's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. The police? His cousin's a cop, Isabella said, bitterness sharp in her voice. They ignore my reports. They always do. She finished the bandaging and stepped back, and Nico buttoned his shirt slowly, carefully, testing whether the movement caused any additional pain. It did. Why are you still here? He asked. You just saw what happened in this house. Why didn't you run? She sat down across from him without being invited. The exhaustion in her face was the kind that came from too many nights without sleep, too many days without real food, too much carrying of weight that should have been shared. Because you were dying, she said simply. And because I have nowhere left to run. So she told him. Everything. The fire 3 weeks ago that had taken her apartment and her job and every possession she owned except the clothes on her back and her mother's locket. Noah, 5 years old, who had stopped asking about his old room because he understood now that some things were just gone. The $150,000 owed to loan sharks who had made very clear what would happen to Noah if she couldn't pay. 10 days left. 10 days to find money that didn't exist, to save a child that she couldn't save because she was drowning. And then Margaret's betrayal. The stolen bracelet that Isabella had never touched. The missing money that Isabella had never taken. The court date for days away where Margaret's expensive lawyers would shred her like paper. Fraud charges. Theft. Prison, probably. Why are you telling me this? Nico asked when she finished. Because I'm too tired to lie anymore, Isabella said. And because tomorrow I'm in court, and it doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what the truth is. Margaret Harrington is rich and I'm nobody, and nobody beats somebody in court. The word hung in the air between them like a curse. Footsteps sounded in the hallway then, rapid and furious, and the study door opened without a knock. Margaret Harrington descended upon them like an ice storm, her face flushed with rage, her diamond necklace glittering like a weapon in the lamplight. How dare you, she spat, looking at Isabella. How dare you involve Mr. Valenti in your sordid problems? You're a thief and a liar and now you're bleeding all over his study. Nico stood. His voice, when he spoke, was soft and absolutely final. Mrs. Harrington. Leave. Margaret's face went white. No one dismissed Margaret Harrington in her own home. No one dismissed her at all. But the man standing before her had a reputation that transcended the normal rules of society, and she felt the weight of that reputation settle on her shoulders like a stone. She left, but not without her final words. The court will handle her tomorrow. Your lawyers can't save her from what's coming. After she was gone, Nico made a phone call. Someone brought Isabella clean clothes, fresh bandages, warm food that she ate mechanically because her body needed fuel even if her mind had stopped believing in survival. He didn't ask her permission or explain himself. He simply arranged for her to be taken care of, and she was too broken to argue. Later, Noah appeared in the doorway, frightened by the thunder that was rolling across Philadelphia like the sound of the world ending. Isabella immediately shifted into the person she was when she was with him, the gentle, steady, completely present. She scooped him up and carried him back to their closet and lay down beside him and sang the lullabies her mother had sung to her. Nico watched from the hallway, and something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. When Isabella finally emerged and found him alone in the study, she was prepared to thank him and disappear, to accept that this moment had been kindness from a powerful man to a powerless woman, nothing more. He stopped her before she could speak. Be at the courthouse tomorrow, he said. At 8 in the morning. I don't think you understand what's going to happen, she started. I'll be there, he said. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. She left his study with his promise still ringing in her ears, not knowing that at that exact moment, Margaret Harrington was on the phone with Rocco and Pietro separately, offering $500,000 to both of them to ensure that Nico's protection did not extend to her. She didn't know that the real war was just beginning. She didn't know that the man in the study had already decided that the people who believed she was nobody were going to learn otherwise. She only knew that somewhere in Philadelphia, a man more powerful than anyone she had ever met had told her not to be late. And tomorrow, everything would change. The Philadelphia Municipal Courthouse smelled like old wood soaked in rain and wet wool from 100 winter coats. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly white glow across the empty courtroom at 8:45 in the morning. Isabella Morales sat alone at the defendant's table in a borrowed dress that hung loose on her frame, the fabric a dull gray that made her skin look translucent. Her hands were folded in front of her, still trembling from the sleepless night she had spent in her converted closet with Noah pressed against her chest. She could feel the weight of her mother's gold locket beneath the neckline of the dress, the chain biting into her skin, the only thing she owned that was worth protecting. $17 sat in her pocket. That was all the money between her and complete devastation. Across the room, Margaret Harrington occupied the front row like a queen holding court. Her diamonds caught the fluorescent light and threw it back like tiny stars. She wore a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Isabella's entire monthly rent, and her lawyer sat beside her, a sharp-faced man in his 60s with the kind of confidence that came from always winning. Margaret's expression was a sculpture of wounded dignity, the face of a woman who had been betrayed by someone she trusted. 3 rows back, Tyler Brennan sat with his arms crossed, his presence a physical weight that pressed down on Isabella's chest every time she became aware of him. The public defender assigned to Isabella was named David Chen, 28 years old, overworked, and already apologetic before the proceedings began. He leaned toward her at the table and whispered words she had heard 100 times, "The evidence looks bad. If you want to take a plea." "I didn't steal anything," Isabella said. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, shattered like glass. "I know," David said, and she believed him. But knowing and proving are 2 different things. The judge entered. Everyone stood. He was a man in his early 60s with gray hair and the permanent expression of someone who had seen the worst humanity had to offer and no longer expected better. His name was Judge Harold Morrison, and he had been presiding over this courthouse for 32 years. The prosecutor stood. His name was Assistant District Attorney Marcus Webb, and he presented his evidence like a man building a house of cards, each piece carefully placed. The photographs came first. An emerald bracelet, exquisite and unmistakably valuable, photographed in what appeared to be Isabella's room in the servants' quarters of the Harrington mansion. Margaret's household account statements followed, showing $3,000 in unexplained discrepancies. Then Margaret herself took the stand. She wept. Small, elegant tears that somehow made her look more beautiful. Her voice trembled as she described finding items missing over the past 6 weeks. She spoke of Isabella's mounting desperation, the rumors about loan sharks, the way the girl had stopped eating lunch with the other staff members and started looking increasingly hollow. "I trusted her," Margaret said, pressing a tissue to her eyes. "I gave her employment when she had nothing. And this is how she repaid that kindness." The prosecutor asked his final question, "Mrs. Harrington, do you have any doubt that Miss Morales stole from your home?" "None whatsoever," Margaret replied. David Cheng cross-examined her, but his questions were weak, almost apologetic. He had no evidence to contradict hers. The judge watched with an expression that Isabella read as sympathy for Margaret and barely concealed skepticism of Isabella's innocence. At 9:47 in the morning, the prosecutor stood to deliver his closing statement and recommend bail be set at $100,000, an amount that might as well have been the national debt. That was when the courtroom doors opened. Everything stopped. The silence that fell was absolute and complete, a silence so profound that the hum of the fluorescent lights became deafening. Nico Valenti stood in the doorway like a man stepping into a painting of his own life. His black suit was tailored to within an inch of perfection, the fabric catching the light like water. He moved stiffly, Isabella noticed, favoring his right side slightly, and she understood with a shock that he was injured. Beneath his white dress shirt, she could see the slight discoloration where blood had seeped through gauze. Behind him stood Rocco and Pietro, identical in their dark suits and their motionless composure. Whispers started immediately. Frantic, urgent whispers. "That's Nico Valenti." What's he doing here? A woman in the gallery gripped her purse like it might protect her. Judge Morrison's face went pale, then flashed red with something that might have been fear or might have been respect. The two expressions, Isabella was learning, looked remarkably similar. A woman in her 50s stepped forward from behind Nico, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had crossed continents. She wore a navy suit and the expression of someone who had never lost an argument in her life. Your Honor, I'm Patricia Rizzo, counsel for Miss Morales. We have new evidence that the court needs to see immediately. Judge Morrison nodded, his hand trembling slightly as he gestured her forward. The prosecutor stood, his mouth opening and closing like a fish removed from water. Margaret's expression shattered. She grabbed her lawyer's arm, whispering frantically into his ear. Patricia Rizzo approached with two files. The first was a video. The courtroom had a television monitor, and she switched it on. The footage was from the Harrington Mansion security cameras, timestamped from 3 days ago at 4:37 in the afternoon. It showed Margaret Harrington in Isabella's small room in the servants' quarters, carefully placing an emerald bracelet into a drawer beneath Isabella's mattress. The gasp that moved through the courtroom was audible and terrible. Margaret tried to stand, but her lawyer pulled her back down. Her face was no longer a sculpture of dignity. Her face was the face of a woman whose house of cards was collapsing in real time, one card at a time. The prosecutor looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Morrison stared at the television screen with his mouth slightly open. The second file contained bank records. Detailed, irrefutable bank records showing the $3,000 had been transferred from the Harrington family account to Margaret's personal account, then to her daughter Vanessa's account, then back again in a complex web of transactions clearly designed to create confusion. A note was attached to the file, typed and dated, in what appeared to be handwriting matching Vanessa Harrington's signature. The note stated, "Mother instructed me to transfer these funds to create the appearance of theft." She wanted to have grounds to fire the maid without severance. Isabella turned to stare at Nico. He was watching her with an expression she could not read, an expression that contained something she did not yet have a name for. His dark eyes held hers for 3 seconds, then he looked away toward the judge. Patricia Rizzo stepped back. Your Honor, Mrs. Harrington engaged in the systematic framing of an innocent employee. This is perjury, fraud, and filing a false report. All charges against Miss Morales should be dismissed immediately. Judge Morrison's hands shook as he reviewed the documents. When he looked up, his expression had transformed entirely. This was a man who had spent 32 years watching the worst of humanity, and he recognized the particular evil of a woman with money using that money to destroy a woman without it. Mrs. Harrington, he said, his voice dropping so low that everyone had to lean forward to hear it. This is a serious abuse of the legal system. This is a violation of everything this court is meant to protect. All charges against Isabella were dismissed in the next 12 minutes. Not reduced. Not postponed pending investigation. Dismissed. But Nico Valenti was not finished. Patricia Rizzo continued, "We are also filing a restraining order against Tyler Brennan on behalf of Miss Morales, Your Honor. We have evidence of assault from yesterday evening." She presented photographs of Isabella's shoulder where Tyler had dragged the knife across her skin. Medical documentation from the hospital. And then, the final piece, security footage from the Harrington mansion showing Tyler Brennan in the rain, his face twisted with rage, dragging Isabella toward the garden wall while she screamed. Tyler stood up from his seat. His face had gone the color of old brick. He opened his mouth to protest, but something in the air changed. Rocco and Pietro shifted slightly, moving toward the courtroom exits with the casual grace of men who had been trained to close doors and open windows and make sure that no one ever left unless they were supposed to. Nico's voice came out quiet. Quiet like the moment before thunder. "Sit down, Mr. Brennan." Tyler collapsed back into his seat like a puppet with its strings cut. The restraining order was granted. Then Judge Morrison added something that made Tyler's face turn from brick red to ash white. "Mr. Brennan, I'm ordering a full investigation into why the Philadelphia Police Department failed to act on Miss Morales' previous reports of harassment. This court will be following that investigation closely." Tyler's cousin the cop could not protect him anymore. Outside the courthouse, 3 blocks away at a federal building, FBI agents were walking up the stairs toward the 4th floor with a warrant in hand. Nico's people had spent the night gathering information, and that information had revealed something very interesting about Tyler Brennan. He had spent the last 4 years running an identity theft ring that had defrauded over 200 people out of approximately $400,000. The FBI had been investigating the ring for months without success. Nico had handed them the evidence on a silver platter with a bow on top. By afternoon, Tyler was being dragged out of his apartment in handcuffs. His screams echoed through the hallway of his building, a sound like an animal understanding for the first time that it was trapped. Federal charges, 15 to 20 years. Identity theft. Wire fraud. Assault. Stalking. He would spend the next 2 decades thinking about the rain-soaked night when he had chosen the wrong maid to hurt. Margaret Harrington's destruction was more elaborate and took slightly longer. The members of her charity board removed her as president that same afternoon based on the courtroom evidence. Her daughter Vanessa, faced with her own potential criminal charges, stopped answering her mother's calls. By evening, Margaret's husband's business partners had begun distancing themselves with the careful courtesy of men abandoning a sinking ship. The IRS announced an audit of Harrington family finances based on irregularities that Nico's people had made sure to surface. Within 48 hours, Margaret Harrington's empire had transformed from unquestionable authority into a subject of public mockery. The Philadelphia Inquirer ran the headline, "Wealthy Philanthropist Jailed for Framing Servant." Social media caught fire with the story. By the end of the week, 3 million people had seen the video of Margaret placing the emerald bracelet in Isabella's room. But before the trial, before any of this happened, Isabella had spent the night before in her converted closet holding a bottle of sleeping pills from the medicine cabinet. 2 in the morning. Rain hammering against the small window above her head. Noah was asleep beside her, his small body curled against hers like a question mark. Her hands were shaking from cold and desperation and the particular exhaustion that comes from carrying something you know you cannot carry much longer. 6 days remained before the loan shark's deadline. 6 days before Noah would be taken from her and placed into foster care with strangers who would never love him the way she did. She held the bottle in her hand. The label read, "Take 1 tablet at bedtime." The bottle contained 43 tablets. She thought, Noah would be better off without me. They would find him a real family. A family with money. A family that could give him things I never could. He deserves more than this. He deserves more than a mother who counts pennies and cries in closets. Her hand moved toward the bottle cap. Just to open it. Just to see if she had the courage. Then Noah shifted in his sleep. His small hand, warm and damp from dreaming, reached out and touched her arm. Without waking, without knowing he was doing it, he whispered 3 words, "Love you, Bella." Isabella's hand froze. The bottle slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. She held Noah so tightly that she worried she might break him, this small boy who had lost everything and still loved her without condition. She whispered against his hair, "I'll find a way. I promise. I swear it on everything I have." She put the sleeping pills back in the medicine cabinet. She did not know how she would survive the next 6 days. But she knew that she would. Because Noah loved her? Because love, even when it came in a size that could fit in the palm of a hand, was sometimes enough. Now Isabella stood outside the Philadelphia Municipal Courthouse in the rain. The storm from last night had not fully passed, and fresh rainwater ran down her face, impossible to distinguish from tears. People were still leaving the building, still whispering. Still staring at her with the expression of people who had witnessed something extraordinary and were trying to understand what they had seen. Nico Valenti approached her, moving with that careful, deliberate gait that revealed his injuries. His dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath stop in her chest. She opened her mouth to thank him. The words were there, formed and ready, "I don't know how to." He stopped her before she could speak. "Don't thank me yet," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "We are not finished. The rain fell harder against the study windows as Isabella's hand trembled, the letter folded and sealed in the envelope she held. Midnight had passed. The mansion was silent except for the occasional rumble of thunder that shook the chandeliers. She had written the words 3 times before she got them right. 3 times because her hands kept shaking too badly to form letters that looked like they came from someone brave instead of someone breaking. She placed the envelope on Nico's mahogany desk, right where he would see it when he came in tomorrow morning. The paper was cream-colored, expensive, something she had stolen from the office supplies because she wanted him to have something beautiful to hold when he read that she was leaving. That she had to leave. That loving him meant saving him by disappearing. Isabella turned toward the door. Nico was standing there. He had been there for 3 minutes, maybe longer. His dark eyes caught the lamplight as they moved from her face to the letter on his desk. He was still in his dress shirt from the business meeting, the fabric loose at the collar, and she could see the bandaging beneath where his wound had not fully healed. His jaw was tight. His expression was the kind of careful blank that meant he was feeling something so intense he could not let his face show it. Going somewhere. His voice was soft, which was worse than if he had shouted. Soft meant controlled. Soft meant dangerous. Isabella's breath caught. Nico, He walked past her, moved to his desk with that deliberate gait, and picked up the envelope. His fingers, scarred and powerful, held it like it might shatter. He opened it. He read. The silence stretched between them like a blade. When he finished, he set the letter down and looked up at her. His eyes burned. You think leaving protects me? His voice was still quiet, still controlled, but now it carried the weight of something that had been building since the moment he found her in his study that first night, bleeding and brave and asking nothing from him except mercy. You think I cannot protect what is mine? The word hung in the air between them. Mine. Isabella's breath came out shattered. I'm not, you can't. Sit down. Not a request. He moved to the leather chair across from his desk, and something in his expression told her that if she did not obey, he would carry her there himself. Saturday. Nico leaned against his desk, arms crossed, and his voice cut through the darkness like a blade through silk. The loan shark who held your debt. The one who gave you 2 weeks or took Noah into foster care. Do you know what happened to him? Isabella's heart stopped. What did you? 2 days ago. I paid off $150,000. Every cent of your debt. The loan shark no longer exists as a problem in your life. He does not exist as a problem for anyone anymore. His dark eyes never left her face. You understand me? That threat is finished. Nico, you can't, you shouldn't have. The words tumbled out in fragments, in shock, in the terrible understanding that he had solved the thing she thought would destroy her. I already have. He moved to stand directly in front of her chair, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. And that is not all. Since the trial ended, there have been men watching you and Noah every moment. Watching the school pickup line. Watching your apartment. Watching the grocery store. Making sure no one touched either of you. Making sure you were safe. You've been, Isabella could not finish the sentence. Protecting you. He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Like she should have known. Because you are not a weakness, Isabella. You are not the danger I need protection from. The people who would hurt you to reach me, they are the danger. And I have already neutralized most of them. Tyler Brennan was in federal prison, 18 years minimum. Margaret Harrington had moved to Boston with what remained of her reputation, which was nothing. Rocco and Pietro had simply disappeared one night, their betrayal discovered, their punishment decided by families older and more dangerous than Nico's own. Justice served not through mercy but through survival. Nico did not explain all of this in words. He did not need to. The implication was clear in the set of his shoulders, the hardness of his eyes. You don't understand what it costs, Isabella whispered. What loving me? Nico took her face in his hands. His palms were rough against her skin, scarred and warm and absolutely certain. I understand exactly what it costs. And I am willing to pay it. I have already paid it. And I would pay it again in blood if that is what survival required. He said it like a vow. Like a prayer spoken in a language only the two of them understood. Don't run from me. His thumbs traced the line of her cheekbones. Stay. Something inside Isabella cracked open. All the walls she had built, all the reasons she had gathered like weapons to keep herself safe from the danger of loving him, they crumbled. She was tired of running. She was tired of being invisible. She was tired of believing that she did not deserve to be protected. She reached up and pulled him down to her. Their kiss tasted like rain and midnight and the kind of mercy she had never believed she would receive. His hands moved from her face to her waist, pulling her up from the chair and against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, wild and strong, matching the rhythm of her own. Lightning flashed outside the window. Thunder answered. When they broke apart, Isabella was crying, and Nico was holding her like she might disappear if he let go. I'm still leaving, she whispered against his chest. Confusion flickered across his face. Isabella? This mansion. She pulled back enough to look at him. Margaret Harrington's closet. I'm leaving that job. Understanding replaced the confusion. A small smile touched his mouth. I already have somewhere better in mind. 1 month later, Isabella stood in the doorway of an apartment on the 4th floor of a building in Center City. Sunlight poured through the windows, golden and warm. There was a living room with a real sofa. A kitchen where she could cook if she wanted to. A bedroom for Noah with walls painted ocean blue and a shelf for his drawing supplies. It was not a mansion. It was a home. Noah ran through the rooms like he was flying, his voice echoing with joy that she had not heard in months. Real joy. The kind that came from a child who had stopped waiting for the next disaster, who had started to believe that good things could be permanent. That evening, Nico arrived with bags of food from a restaurant on Walnut Street. He taught Noah how to play chess while Isabella watched from the kitchen, her hands in soapy water, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sorrow but tears of gratitude for a life she never thought she would have. Nico, do you regret it? The question came out while they were cleaning up, while Noah was in the shower. Everything you did. Everything it cost you? Nico turned from the sink, his hands still wet, his dark eyes steady on hers. Regret? You are the only thing I have done in 15 years that I do not regret. A week later, Isabella showed him the journal she had been keeping. Pages filled with her thoughts, her realizations, her understanding of what it meant to survive. I learned something, she told him. I spent so long thinking I had to carry everything alone. That asking for help was weakness. That love was dangerous. But you showed me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone stand with you. Nico pulled her close. You saved me first. That night in my study, you could have run. You stayed. You saw me bleeding and you stayed. On a Sunday afternoon in July, the three of them walked through Fairmount Park. Noah ran ahead toward the playground, his laughter bright and free. Isabella walked beside Nico, their hands intertwined, her mother's gold locket warm against her chest beneath her shirt. What happens now? She asked. Nico looked at her, and in his eyes was something that looked like peace. Now we live. We protect each other. We build something that cannot be taken away. I like that plan, Isabella whispered. Noah called for them from the swings, and they walked forward together toward the future, toward the family they had built from ashes and blood and the kind of grace that comes when someone chooses to see you instead of looking through you. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only love can do that. Isabella had not understood those words before. Now they lived in her like a heartbeat, like the truth that had saved her life. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that even in the darkest moments, love can find a way through. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will break your heart and build it back stronger. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever had someone show up for you when you needed it most? We read every single one. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story.